since our brains are wired for community almost above everything else, that social media can be a replacement for in-person community. And that social media, if communities are built and authentic value is being brought to the table and all of that, then you can't argue with that. It's a good. But what they found is even when somebody is really positive on Facebook, it's also psychologically harmful.
Welcome to Audio Branding, the hidden gem of marketing. Sound plays a more important role in human behavior and our decision-making than you may realize. In this podcast, I'll help you understand the art and science of sound so you can better influence others in business and your life. I'm your host, Jody Krangle. Let's delve a little deeper. This is the second part of my interview with Austin Franke. As far as audio-only assets are concerned, do you suggest to clients that they make the most of this audio for their own advertising? And I think when we were talking about this, you mentioned availability bias.
Yes, yeah. So that's another thing that Byron Sharp talks about. In his research, he found there are really essentially two sides to the coin of how a brand grows. There's mental availability and physical availability.
Yes.
Mental availability is more of the availability bias side of things, which is the brand that is easiest to recall in a buying situation wins every time. Even though that brand might not have a good value proposition, they're probably not the best quality product. It doesn't matter. They might not be the cheapest. It doesn't matter. If you can recall them, availability bias states that you perceive it as more important than other things that you can't recall. And so mental availability is essentially being as easy as possible for the customer to recall in a buying situation. And then physical availability is the other side, which I don't deal too much in, which is essentially being physically available. If you look at if you go to the grocery store and Ragu has a ton of different varieties and a ton of bottles or jars, then you're going to look at them before you see the little niche brand that has 2 or 3, because it's easier to buy. It's physically in front of you. And those are really the two sides of the coin of how a brand grows. And so the availability bias is really interesting, and that's where audio comes in. If you can kind of sneak in and creep into customers' brains over time, they might not ever buy your ad for 3 years or your brand for 3 years. But when they do buy that brand, there's a ton of other people just like them that are also buying it 3 years after they start hearing those ads. And those, according to the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, are your most valuable customers. They're the ones you should prioritize. And so it's the long game. You have to be patient and humble. You can't assume customers think about you or care about you ever. And
it's a good point to make. Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, that's essentially the availability bias is a psychological concept, which I'm assuming is close to where Byron Sharp got coined his phrases. I haven't heard him that I know of speak specifically about it, but it's a well-known bias where we gravitate towards the things we can recall easily.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And audio, of course, helps us recall. So
exactly, it's a very powerful tool for that.
Yeah. So how has things, in the advertising world, especially from what you've seen, how do you think that's changed over time? I guess because we're seeing a lot of new, interesting places for people to be able to advertise, and streaming media and YouTube and Netflix and Hulu and everything's being disrupted, kind of like the taxi industry with Uber.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. So there's two there's two theories and philosophies of marketing and advertising. Ever since Byron Sharp's book How Brands Grow, which I highly recommend everybody check out, and of course before him the Andrew Ehrenberg, a lot of really big name brands are paying very close attention to all of their latest research all the time, because they trust the data, they trust the evidence, right? And so you see some brands doing that. Again, the insurance industry is a great example of brands. I'm not sure if they were familiar with Byron Sharp when Geico came out with the Geico Gecko. They probably were. We're seeing more brands start to do that. And then you have the opposite theory or philosophy, which is very much brand love, which is this idea of coming across as a brand, as a person, or as a human being. And, it comes from very good psychological evidence that our brains are wired for community above really all else,
Yeah.
other than maybe survival.
That
And
whole
often
know,
even,
like, trust thing. Yeah.
exactly. And often even the survival instinct is trumped by the community instinct. This is why we have heroic acts, right? And so, but what the misunderstanding comes from, I believe, is assuming that customers will ever view a brand like they do a person.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And I think that is the big mistake. And the bigger community you have in the beginning, if you, so I always use the example of this local dive bar. We have a ton of them here in Milwaukee. We're like the capital of bars. There's one on every corner, and everyone has their established 10 to 20 customers that come in regularly. But those customers aren't going to that bar because of the brand of the bar. They're going to the bar because their friends are there. There are human beings there. Now let's take Applebee's, which has a bar but isn't just primarily a bar, obviously. People aren't going to Applebee's because their friends are hanging out at Applebee's. People are going to Applebee's because Applebee's advertises a lot all the time. And so now people are choosing Applebee's because of the brand, not because of the community. But the mistake that a lot of marketing and advertising gurus are making is believing that with a big community or with a big brand, you can create a strong community with relationships to individuals within that community. And it's just not proven to be true. And so you see the opposite in their advertisements. Usually their advertisements are trying to persuade you to buy their product. But now, more recently, they're trying to do it through brand purpose and through claims that they are going to change the world. And we saw all the COVID commercials of everybody trying to tell everyone, we're with you, stay together, all of this stuff. That comes from a philosophy that you can have a relationship with a customer. And from that comes a lot of other myths, which are you could create a customer persona that's very specific to an ideal customer. And if you can get the ideal customers to buy your brand, they're going to stay with you for life and tell your friends about them. And so they will target now and niche down their brands to very specific people. And what you find is that none of the big brands are doing that. I mean, look at Apple, which might have tried to do that, but they aren't very successful. Their phones look like everyone else's phones.
Yeah.
Their interface isn't that much different than Windows, but they do keep you loyal because it's annoying to have to switch back to Windows, not because
or make the switch to
or make
Apple.
the switch to Apple. Exactly. It goes both ways.
Yeah.
And Coca-Cola, they've all, in a lot of ways, a lot of these brands have tried the relationship model. And some of them might even think that the relationship model is the reason for their success. And that's where Byron Sharp comes in. A lot of the big name brands that gave him their data and the institute before him, they were surprised when he came back and said what he said about customer loyalty. It was a surprise to them. They really were investing in customer loyalty. But what they didn't realize was that customer loyalty was a side effect to growth. But because they saw their customers were very loyal, they kept doing it more and more. And then some big brands are just like, F Byron Sharp, I don't want to be that kind of a brand or whatever. And so they're also leaning heavily into whatever the societal trend is of the day, right? And so you're really seeing these two different types of advertising right now, and one works and one doesn't.
Yeah, interesting point. Yeah. I think also, especially maybe in the case of Coke, that I mean, they started doing all of that brand
Hmm.
loyalty stuff with the songs and stuff like,
Yeah.
Barry Manilow wrote their songs, didn't he?
Yeah.
Like in the
Yeah.
beginning. So that kind of thing was going on, but they were a smaller brand then.
Hmm.
So maybe
Hmm.
they could get away with it a little more at that time. And we're talking the
Sure. Yeah.
70s, right? Like,
Right. Right.
So I think now with so many people out there with so many choices,
Yeah. Yeah.
really being top of mind is what you need to do.
Exactly. And I think, you bring up Coca-Cola. One of the great examples, or one of the examples in Mad Men at the very end, I won't tell you what happens at the very end, but essentially you find out Don Draper was the one that came up with, or it's implied that Don Draper came up with, I'd like to buy the world a Coke and
Yeah.
whatever in the 60s and 70s. And I
Yeah.
think a large part of, I would imagine, their incentive for that song was to try to unite the world. It was to show them that you have the same values as they do, and all of that. But the song was catchy and used the word Coke in it. And so I think the mistake was that Coca-Cola assumed that the values driven aspect of the commercial persuaded customers to buy. In reality, they probably ran the ad a ton and the song was catchy and used Coke's name.
Yeah.
And that's what the research is saying is really effective.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to see a case study on that, though.
Yeah, I agree. It would be very interesting to see what the results of that would be. Are you looking for ways to improve your company's or podcast's impact? You'd be surprised how powerful the use of an intentional audio branding strategy can be. Want to know more? I have a free downloadable PDF that gives you my 5 tips for implementing an intentional audio strategy at voiceoversandvocals.com/audio-branding-strategy. That location does ask to put you on a mailing list, just to send you updates on when the new podcasts come out. But if you really don't want to give your email out, I understand. Just contact me directly. My email is all over my website, and I'll make sure you get that PDF without needing to sign up anywhere. If you do sign up, though, you also get access to a resources section called The Studio, where I have videos, white papers, and PDFs, discounts from my guests, and snippets of audio from my guests that no one else gets to hear. So maybe it's worth your while. Totally up to you. And of course, if you're looking for voiceovers, you can get in touch with me about that too. Now, back to the podcast. Moving on to something that's kind of a phenomenon, a little less now. I think it's kind of lessening in popularity at the moment, but Clubhouse. Have you been on Clubhouse?
I have not been on Clubhouse.
Have you heard of it and have other people
Yeah.
told you about it? Yeah.
I have.
Yeah.
I don't want to say anything about where I think it's going to go. Just because I could be proven wrong. I don't think I will be. Maybe I will. I'll just say it. I don't think it's going to work. I think Twitter and Facebook and
Well, they're the bigger.
everyone,
Yeah.
exactly. They're going to eat them up and copy them.
Yeah.
And chances are that was probably Clubhouse's. They knew that was going to happen all along, but
Yeah.
their founders are probably just trying to get some money out of some VCs and move on. That's my guess. That's how
Sure.
startup culture works these
Yeah.
days. You don't have to be profitable or successful. You just need a bunch of money in the beginning. And so, yes, but I do think it's an interesting concept, and I think it's probably one that people will gravitate to or like, and I think that's probably why the big companies are trying to copy them. And but I don't know if I've thought too much on why it might be good or why people might gravitate towards it. But chances are they're never going to use traditional media to advertise.
Yeah.
Every tech startup starts off thinking that they don't need traditional media to advertise, and they all eventually, if they survive, get proven wrong. Facebook spends a ton of money on traditional advertising now. So does Amazon, but they did it in the beginning and were principled against it in the beginning. So I think that's probably going to lead to something that doesn't go very far. But from what I understand, their downloads have just dramatically declined.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
After
I'm
winter.
curious. Exactly, after winter. Yeah.
Yeah. We're not all stuck inside anymore.
Hmm.
But
Exactly.
they opened it up to Android just recently.
Yeah, I
So,
think that was another big mistake. Physical
yeah.
availability.
Yeah.
A huge mistake was not being easy to use. Half of I don't know what the exact statistics, but I would imagine, I think it's even more than half of phone users are on Android rather than iPhone.
Yeah.
So I think it's
Yeah.
the silliest thing in the world to just like try to release a product and take an entire year to reach half of the world. I mean, that's just silly to me.
Yeah.
Especially in developing countries, Android is king, actually, from what I was just listening to a podcast about that. So worldwide, it was a terrible decision for them.
Interesting, though. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually just came across a program, I guess, that allows me to run Clubhouse on my desktop. And I'm on a PC.
Yeah, there you go.
So now that's how I'm accessing Clubhouse, which makes it a lot easier for me because I can use the audio on my desktop computer.
Exactly. Yep.
So what are your thoughts on social media in general? I'm curious because we had a brief conversation about that. And you just mentioned that both Facebook and who else were you mentioning there? Facebook and was it
Twitter?
Twitter. Okay.
Yeah.
Now they're advertising a lot in general media.
Or sorry, I didn't know that was the question. Yeah, Amazon.
Oh, Amazon. You're right.
So Facebook, Amazon. It's FAANG. It stands for FAANG, and it's like Facebook, Amazon, Google is one of them. Netflix, I think. And then there's another A. I think it might be. No, I'm not sure. Anyway, but they are investing heavily in traditional advertising right now. Maybe not because of COVID, so you might not see that in the data from this last year. But I guarantee you they're going to go back to it.
Sure.
And they definitely were before. So, but yeah, my philosophy on social media is it can help you if you're a small business. It can be very helpful if you're a small business. It's a lot less effective. It's virtually non-effective if you're a big brand, if you're using it on its own. It's only really effective as a complement to traditional media, at least now. The trends are showing that that'll be the case for a long time to come. So Gary Vee is wrong, at least now with his advice. And two researchers that are really instrumental in that are two guys named Les Binet and Peter Field. They are econometrics analysts, or however you call their title. And essentially, they're finding people's reality of mediums that they're using. And the app, so they judge by large business effects. So they'll take a bunch of ads and measure their large business effects. So over time, how many big, huge pushes or how many like drastic changes in effectiveness have they seen from their business? So what they were finding is the traditional media, TV, radio, billboards are still the most effective there. So that's my philosophy. That's my standpoint on social media in terms of an effectiveness standpoint. But if you're small and you can't afford traditional media channels, which I can't, then social media might be the way to go. On the other hand, I've talked to a lot of brand strategists who have told me that they spend the most of their time investing in social media from a brand awareness or advertisement standpoint, and they see the least effects from it. Usually word of mouth and referrals are how they've built their business. And so again, effectiveness, that's my philosophy there, or what I've noticed and what I've seen from the data there. In terms of personal use or my philosophy of social media in general, I think it's a very harmful thing for society. I think people have made a mistake to believe that since our brains are wired for community almost above everything else, that social media can be a replacement for in-person community. And that social media, if communities are built and authentic value is being brought to the table and all of that, then you can't argue with that. It's a good. But what they found is even when somebody is really positive on Facebook, it's also psychologically harmful. So what we're seeing now is a lot of young people, Gen Z and probably below, and millennials. I think it started with them. Although I don't believe in any of those terms. There's a lot of research to say that there's research to say that there's no universal differences between generations. It's essentially age. You get older, you get whatever.
That kind of makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, baby boomers were responsible for the sexual revolution. So you can't really say that baby boomers have always been traditional and whatever, right?
Well, we all grow up with different social norms and different technology and different opportunities. Right. So that would change some of the sensibilities.
Exactly. Yeah. And there are some differences. There's a big difference between Gen Z and millennials: depression rates, suicide rates,
Really? Okay.
self-harm rates. And it's almost directly, they haven't, some people would say that there's causation there, but most people would say there's a strong correlation between depression rates, suicide rates, and social media. And if you really think
Yeah.
about that, it's true. If you talk to a young person, they don't see social media as a way to connect with their friends. They see it as a way to curate their own personal brand.
Yep.
And they're protective of future employees that they may never have for 15 years. They're deleting posts constantly. They are curating their social media channels to appear authentic, to appear genuine, but in reality, to put on a face.
My goodness, if the internet was around when I was a kid,
Man.
all the
Yeah,
stupid stuff I did when I was a kid on the internet.
Exactly.
Oh, no.
Exactly. Yeah.
These kids really have some kind of social savvy that I
Right.
really didn't have when I was growing up, but we didn't
Right.
know.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And that's that, there's like I might call it a toxic positivity, which is no one disagrees with anyone. Or it's like the opposite. They hate everyone. So there's really those two sides of the coin. So it's divided us as a country. It's all of the social media platforms are designed to addict us. I mean, there's
Of course.
nobody, Facebook might dispute that, but the people that have left Facebook that, worked on in the beginning are like, you can't dispute that. This is definitely what we were doing. Why are you saying we weren't? Right.
I saw that documentary. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The social dilemma. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but I was actually, thinking about this before that documentary came out, and I was very aware of Humane Tech, which is a great organization. Tristan Harris was one of the main guys featured in the documentary. He created Humane Tech after leaving Google. He was that guy. I found out about him a couple of years ago, and I've been really intrigued by his work ever since. But so early on in my business, I was starting to notice how unhealthy it was for me and my family to focus on social media for business. I was still, personally posting pictures of, my wedding and our baby when she was born and things like that. But for business, it just felt very harmful to me personally and to my family.
Yeah.
And so I got off of it early on, and read a book by Cal Newport called Deep Work, which essentially makes the case that rare and valuable work leads to success more than a bunch of superficial, hard, long hours of work, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And essentially that's what social media wants you to do. It wants you to spend hours on a social media post, posting about cliche experiences and advice.
Yeah.
And so that was interesting. And he's never been on social media, and he's found success as a thought leader. And then he also wrote a book called Digital Minimalism, which I have not read, but essentially he talks about the trade-off between social media or digital forms of anything and what it does in our lives.
Sure.
And he would say, if you're not addicted to social media or not prone to addiction to social media, go for it. Use it in your business, use it personally, whatever. It doesn't really matter to an extent, even though eventually the platforms will try and addict you, and maybe it'll work and maybe it won't. But he says to really examine something before using it. And this is why I'm not on Clubhouse. I haven't examined it.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
I've examined LinkedIn, I've examined Facebook, I've examined Instagram by investing in them, and came to the conclusion they weren't right for me. And so I don't use them. And Clubhouse might be different. Who knows?
Or something
we'll
like
see.
Clubhouse.
Or something like Clubhouse, right?
Yeah.
It might be good for my family. There's actually, I'll give a little shout out to, I use an online platform called Kinetic, Kinetic. I think joinkinetic.com is their website, but they are interested in connecting you. They actually do the work of that. You don't go and cold message people. They connect you with other thought leaders or business leaders or potential customers if you have a startup or whatever. they make the connection for you, and it's a face-to-face video call.
Oh,
And
interesting.
so without cold messages,
Mm-hmm.
and just keeping things typed or online, you actually see people face to face and meet them face to face. And I think what they're doing is great. And they were influenced by Humane Tech, and they just started recently, and they're kind of local to me a little bit, but they're expanding. So things like that, that is something that I decided, oh yeah, I'm going to do that. That makes sense for me and my family,
It
and for
does.
my
Yeah.
business.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of an example, but that's generally my philosophy in terms of social media effectiveness, and personally my philosophy on why I don't use it for my own business or
Sure.
personally.
Yeah. And that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. I get it.
Yeah.
I know we're all dealing with a lot these days, so I really wanted to acknowledge those that have gone out of their way to leave an honest review of this podcast. Like Hazel, who writes, "Great show, great selection of guests, and provides valuable insights about the sound industry. Thanks, Jody." Thanks so much for your kind words, Hazel. I'm really glad you're enjoying it. And for those of you that are interested, you can also leave a voice review now off of the main podcast page. It's super simple, and I'd love to hear what you think. Now, back to the show. So, what are you working on right now? I know that,
Yeah.
I mean, please do talk about your company, because I know that all
Yeah.
of the stuff that we just talked about, you do in your company.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So in general, there's kind of two things that I do with Woo Punch. And in some ways they're not related, even though a lot of brand strategists like to put them together. It's a trend. But essentially there's, on the one side of things is company culture, and not only company culture, even if you're a solopreneur, helping you to identify the long-term good of you, your business, your employees, and then your customers, and really leaning into that, and then using behavioral science to leverage kind of short-term selfish motivators, things that you just want to do immediately or whatever, to achieve that long-term good. And so that's one thing that I help clients with. And then on the branding side, it's really essentially helping them to build distinctive brand assets. So I'm the consultant essentially, and then I work with designers, I work with audio production companies, I work with ad agencies to actually create the content, and I'm the guy that gives them the foundation for their brand to begin with, and then offers ongoing support to be the guy that when they start to see, essentially I see myself as kind of like a sheepdog. I'm like keeping them on course.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm keeping them from being distracted by the sexy thing over there, right? I'm keeping them from being distracted by brand purpose or mission statement or whatever is the popular trend of the day.
Sure.
And so that's what I do from a branding standpoint. But then also I write, and I really love exposing the lies of the business industry, whether that's culture or advertising, marketing, branding, with empirical data that debunks some of the most common popular wisdom. So
Yeah.
that's a big piece. I love, and I'm trying to establish myself as a writer as well. I haven't done much other than my own newsletter, but I love writing, and I love learning. And so I would really love to be able to monetize that down the road as well. And
Sure.
towards that. But yeah, largely what I do is consult clients and then write.
So how can people get in touch with you? And what's the URL of your blog? Because I think people should read that.
So you can't get in touch with me on LinkedIn or Instagram or Twitter, or I was never on Twitter, but or Facebook, or Clubhouse yet.
Yeah.
But you can email me at austin @woopunch.com. And if you don't want to have that, contact yet, and you're just really curious about the company and what I do, you can go to woopunch.com. And on that website, there's a lot of prompts to subscribe to my newsletter. And I post my archive articles that I've sent through my newsletter on my URL called woopunch.com, I guess, /branding bullshit.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's essentially, if you subscribe to my newsletter, you won't get any more than 3 emails a month, and you will often see the subject line branding bullshit dash whatever bullshit I'm debunking in the email. So so that's a fun little project that I've been doing.
I love it. I love it. And you allowed me to include something in my studio resources about the 2021 commercials.
Super Bowl.
Yeah.
The Super Bowl ads. So
the Super Bowl ads.
We as consumers, we like to rank the ads based on what entertained us and what we enjoyed and all of these things. But we as consumers have no idea what makes an ad effective, and often the most boring Super Bowl commercials are the most effective. I mentioned State Farm's ad, which was pretty boring. There was nothing interesting about it, really. It had Aaron Rodgers in it, whatever, but essentially, it had Jake from State Farm, a character. It had their logo intro. Actually, they didn't do the logo intro, which was weird for me. But they had their little do, and everything looked like a State Farm ad, and everything was very consistent. The number one ad on that list is the Bud Light ad. Because they used a ton of distinctive assets from the past. That's essentially the whole thing. It's the Real Men of Genius guy, and it's, I think maybe the frogs were in it. I'm not sure, but
so
from beginning
effective.
to end, from beginning to end, it's obvious it's not a Bud Light ad, or it's not a Miller Lite ad. It's not a Coors ad. It is a Bud Light ad through and through. And then the least effective ad I have on there is the Verizon ad, which had Samuel L. Jackson in some sort of 3D animated ad. And one, they mentioned the Verizon name once. Two, none of it looked like a Verizon ad. And three, they used Capital One's distinctive asset in Samuel L. Jackson.
Really not.
But, even to begin with, Capital One didn't make the best move choosing him as a distinctive asset, because celebrities are actually not great distinctive assets because we have mental associations already with them. But they definitely played enough ads as Capital One with him to confuse people if they never look up when they hear Sam Jackson's voice in an ad. So essentially they advertised for Capital One. And I think that was the most ridiculous thing ever. So that's my loser of the Super Bowl.
Okay, well, we have been schooled. Thank you so much for speaking with me today. This has been really fascinating, and I'm looking forward to getting this out there so that people can hear this, because I think they need to hear this.
I hope it'll be helpful for people out there.
Yeah, well, thanks so much. Well, that's the end of this episode. Thanks for listening. And if you like what you heard, why not tell a friend about this podcast? It's available in all the usual locations. Until next time.